Most people who come to Family Feud come for the same reasons. They want to win money. They want to meet Steve Harvey. They want a story to tell their grandchildren about the time the whole family flew to Lowe's Angels and stood under those bright lights and played a game on national television. They come for the fun of it, and usually that is exactly what they get. But every so often, a moment happens on that stage that has nothing to do with the game. A moment that comes from somewhere deeper, from the private interior of a marriage, from the unspoken dynamics that families carry with them wherever they go, even onto a game show set in California on a Tuesday afternoon in April. Marcus Webb had driven 3 hours to the airport. He had packed carefully. He had worn the navy blazer his mother had given him for his birthday 2 years earlier because he wanted to look right. He had held the door for his wife Denise as they boarded the plane, the same way he had held doors for her for the past 11 years, and she had walked through without looking back at him, the same way she had for longer than he cared to count. Marcus was a good man who had been quietly made to feel like he was not enough. And on a Tuesday afternoon in April, under the lights of the Family Feud studio, that truth came out, not in private, not in a counselor's office, not in the slow erosion of a bedroom argument, but in front of a live audience, a television crew, and Steve Harvey, who heard exactly one sentence from Denise Webb and decided that some things cannot go unanswered. This is the story of what happened that day. It is not a simple story. It is not a story where one person is entirely right and the other is entirely wrong. It is the story of a man who worked hard and loved his family and deserved better than he was getting, and a woman who had to face, publicly, with no preparation, the version of herself that she had convinced herself nobody else could see. And it is the story of Steve Harvey, who has known both poverty and wealth, and who understood in his bones exactly what it meant when a wife described her husband to the world as too poor. Marcus Webb was 47 years old and had been working since he was 15. That was not a figure of speech. At 15, he had taken a part-time job stocking shelves at a grocery store in Decatur, Georgia, because his mother was raising 3 children alone after his father left, and Marcus was the oldest, and it was the practical thing to do. He did not make a story out of it. He just did it. He had carried that instinct, the instinct to simply do what needs to be done without waiting to be thanked for it, into every part of his adult life. He had gotten his high school diploma while working 20 hours a week. He had taken community college courses at night while working full-time in his 20s. He had spent the better part of a decade working his way into a supervisory position at a municipal water treatment facility. Not a glamorous job, not a high-profile career, but honest work that served his community and paid a consistent wage and came with benefits and a pension that he had been contributing to for 19 years. He was not rich. He had never been rich. He drove a 7-year-old truck that he maintained himself on weekends. He grew vegetables in the backyard every summer because he liked to, and because his grandmother had taught him to, and because there was something satisfying about eating something you had grown with your own hands. He coached his son's little league team. He called his mother every Sunday without fail. He was the kind of man who, if you needed help moving, would show up with his truck and not ask for anything in return. The kind of man his neighbors described when the subject came up as solid, dependable, real. He had been married to Denise for 11 years. They had 2 children together, a daughter named Brianna, who was 9, and a son named Jordan, who was 7. Marcus was present in the way that good fathers are present. At the breakfast table, at the baseball games, at the school plays, at the kitchen table doing homework. He was there. He had always been there. Denise Webb was 44 years old and had, somewhere in the middle of her marriage, developed a way of talking about her life that did not quite match the life she was actually living. She worked as an office manager at a medical practice, a good job with real responsibility, and she had a circle of friends and acquaintances who moved in slightly more comfortable financial territory than she and Marcus did. This was not unusual in itself. What was unusual was the way Denise had started to talk. She had started making small comments, the kind that could always be defended as jokes or venting or just being honest. Comments about the truck. Comments about the vacations they could not afford that her friends were taking. Comments at dinner parties, said lightly, with a laugh about Marcus and his vegetable garden, about how she had not exactly married into money. The comments were never vicious. They were just constant. And they had the specific quality of things that are said in public that would never be said so plainly in private, because saying them in public gave her a way to retreat. I was only joking. Can't you take a joke? Marcus had learned to absorb them. That, too, was part of who he was, a man who did not make scenes, who trusted that the people who mattered to him knew the truth about his character, who kept his dignity by not arguing over things he could not change. He was not a wealthy man. He knew that. Denise knew that when she married him. He had never pretended otherwise. But 11 years of small comments accumulate. And there is a difference between the private weight a man carries from being quietly diminished and the public moment when that diminishment happens in front of a studio audience and a camera crew and Steve Harvey. The Family Feud application had been Denise's idea. She had filled it out one evening without telling Marcus, and when the callback came, she had presented it to him as a done deal, which was fine with Marcus, because Marcus was the kind of man who went along with things his wife organized as long as the family was together and nobody was being hurt. The team was 5. Marcus and Denise, Marcus's younger sister Yvette, who was 43 and had been his closest ally his entire life, Denise's cousin Rochelle, who was 41 and loud in the specifically cheerful way that makes a game show audience love someone immediately, and their neighbor Gerald, who was 55 and had been friends with Marcus since they were young men and had accepted the invitation with the words, "You know I will embarrass all of you and I do not care." They flew to Los Angeles on a Thursday. They did tourist things on Friday, a bus tour, the Walk of Fame, dinner at a restaurant that was nicer than anything they normally went to at home. Denise posted photographs on social media. In all of them she looked happy, which was not false. She was happy in the way that people on trips are happy, lifted temporarily out of the frictions of ordinary life. Marcus looked happy in the photographs too. He loved his family. He loved this specific group of people. He was glad to be there. Whatever had been wearing him down at home, he had set it aside for the weekend. Yvette watched her brother the whole trip. She watched the way he deferred to Denise in small moments without being asked. She watched the way Denise sometimes spoke over him in group conversations as if he had not started a sentence. She did not say anything. She had learned over 11 years when to speak and when to wait. She did not have to wait long. The Family Feud studio was everything they had hoped for and louder than any of them expected. Rochelle screamed when Steve Harvey walked out, which caused the entire audience to laugh, which caused Rochelle to scream again in delight, which set the whole group off. Even Marcus laughed, a full, real laugh that Yvette had not heard from him in longer than she could remember. Steve worked the room the way he always does, and then came down to meet the web team. He shook Marcus's hand first and held it for a moment, the way men of a certain generation sometimes do when they are taking the measure of each other. "Mr. Webb," he said, "you look like a man who means business." Marcus said, "Yes, sir, I came to win." Steve moved down the line, Yvette, Gerald, Rochelle, each of whom delivered exactly the energy the situation called for. Then he reached Denise. Denise was charming in the practiced way she was charming in social situations. She smiled, she said the right things, she told Steve she had been a fan for years. And then lightly, easily, in the tone of a woman making comfortable small talk, she said, "I just hope we win. Lord knows we need it. My husband works at the water plant, so," she laughed. "We are not exactly rolling in it." The laugh was meant to land the whole thing as self-deprecating and warm, and in certain company, in certain contexts, it might have, but Steve Harvey had grown up with very little. He had been broke, genuinely, seriously broke, for stretches of his adult life before his career found its footing. He knew the difference between a person who laughs about having less and a person who is laughing at the person beside them for having less. It is a small difference in words and a large difference in meaning. He looked at Denise for just a moment. Then he looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking straight ahead. His jaw was set in the particular way that a man's jaw sets when he has heard something like this before and has made a practice of not reacting. Steve Harvey filed that away. The game had not started yet. He was a professional. He moved on, but he did not forget. The Webb family was matched against the Okafor family from Houston, a Nigerian-American family anchored by a 62-year-old patriarch named Emmanuel who buzzed in on the very first question with such speed and confidence that Steve Harvey looked at him and said, "Sir, have you done this before?" Emmanuel had not. He was simply that kind of man. The game was competitive throughout. The Okafor family took an early lead, and the Webb team clawed it back in the second round when Gerald, fulfilling his promise to embarrass everyone, buzzed in with an answer that was so unexpectedly correct that Steve Harvey had to check the board twice. "How did you know that?" Steve asked him. Gerald shrugged and said, "I know things." The audience loved him. Marcus was precise and reliable throughout the main game. He did not make the flashy plays, he made the right ones. He hit 2 top answers in the 3rd and 4th rounds that kept his family in contention when the Okafors were threatening to pull away. His teammates rallied around him. Rochelle was electric at the podium. Yvette was calm and accurate. Even Denise played well. She was competitive and smart, and whatever was complicated between her and her husband did not show up in the way she played the game. The Webb family won the main game by 44 points. Rochelle screamed again. Gerald pointed at the scoreboard as if he had personally installed it. Yvette hugged her brother, and for a moment she felt him hold on a second longer than usual before letting go. Steve gathered the family at center stage. 2 players for fast money, 5 questions each, 200 points to win $20,000. There was a brief discussion. Rochelle was enthusiastic but acknowledged she got rattled under pressure. Gerald nominated himself, then immediately unnominated himself. Yvette said she was fine either way. Denise said she and Marcus should go. They were the couple. They knew each other's thinking. It made sense. Marcus agreed. Denise would go first, he would close. As Denise stepped toward the podium and Marcus moved to the side of the stage to wait, Steve Harvey positioned himself for the round. He looked at Denise with the warm, hosting professionalism he brought to everything. But there was something else in his eyes, an alertness, a readiness, that only someone paying close attention would have noticed. He had not forgotten what she said during the introduction. He was waiting to see if the woman at the podium was the same as the woman who had laughed about her husband's job to make conversation. The first 3 questions went smoothly. Steve asked Denise to name something a wife brags about at her book club. She said her kids, which landed as the number 2 answer at 26 points. He asked her to name something a husband does that makes his wife proud. She said provides for the family, which came up as number 1 at 38 points. And she said it quickly and without hesitation, which was interesting given what came next. The third question, name a quality women look for in a husband. Denise said ambition, number 2 answer, 22 points, 86 points after 3 questions. She was on a solid pace. Then Steve asked her the 4th question, name something a wife wishes her husband had more of. Denise answered without pausing. Money, she said, and then before the board even turned, she laughed and added, I'm just being honest. Marcus, baby, I'm just being honest. The audience laughed the way audiences laugh when they are not sure whether something is a joke or not, but the person who said it is laughing, so they follow the lead. The board turned. Money, number 1 answer, 44 points. Steve Harvey read the number. He announced it. He did everything a host is supposed to do. And then he set the card down on the podium and looked at Denise, and the audience slowly realized that something was shifting. Can I ask you something? Steve said. His voice was still warm. But the warmth had a different quality to it now. Sure, Denise said, still smiling. When you said that you wish your husband had more money, were you speaking generally? Like, every wife wants more money, or were you speaking specifically about Marcus? Denise laughed again, but this time the laugh was slightly less curt. I mean both. Every woman wants financial security, right? Sure, Steve said. Sure. But you also said earlier, when we were introducing the families, that your husband works at the water plant. And you said it in a way that suggested that was less than. He paused. Was that a joke? The studio went quiet. Not the drop-everything silence of a bombshell, the more uncomfortable silence of a room full of people watching someone be asked a question they were not prepared for. Denise's smile stayed on her face but no longer quite reached her eyes. I was just being funny. Marcus knows I love him. Steve Harvey nodded slowly. I know, he said. I'm sure he does. He looked over at Marcus, who was standing at the side of the stage with his arms folded and his expression carefully neutral. Marcus, you want to say anything? Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, I'm good. Steve looked back at Denise, and then he said the thing that the studio and eventually the world would not forget. Steve Harvey set the index card down on the podium and turned slightly so that he was addressing not just Denise but the entire room. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform outrage. He spoke the way men speak when they are saying something they have thought about for a long time. I grew up with nothing, he said. I mean nothing, and I have had moments in my adult life where I was sleeping in my car. So I want to be very clear that I am not speaking from a place of not understanding what it feels like to wish your circumstances were different. I understand that deeply. He paused. But there is a difference between wishing your circumstances were better and making your husband feel small for the circumstances he is in. And I think everybody in this room heard that this morning. And I think, he said, looking at Denise with directness but not cruelty, that you know which one of those you were doing. Denise opened her mouth, closed it. The smile was gone now. She was a smart woman, and smart women know when a mirror has been put in front of them, even when they would rather look away. I am not trying to embarrass you, Steve continued. That is not what this is, but I have got to tell you something because I mean it. A man who goes to work every day, who takes care of his children, who shows up, that man is not poor. That man is rich in the ways that actually matter. And the fact that you cannot see that right now, he said, and his voice carried something in it that was almost sadness, That is not his problem, that is yours." The audience did not cheer immediately. They sat with it for a moment the way audiences sit with things that are true and need a second to settle before they can respond. And then the applause came, not the reflex applause of entertainment, but the slower, fuller kind that means, yes, that is what needed to be said. From the side of the stage, Marcus had watched the entire exchange with the still, steady expression he brought to hard things. He had not moved. He had not intervened. He had let Steve Harvey say what Steve Harvey was saying, and he had stood there with the quiet dignity of a man who had been waiting, without realizing it, for someone to tell the truth out loud on his behalf. When the applause settled, Steve looked over at him. "Marcus, come here, brother." Marcus walked to the center of the stage. Steve shook his hand, not the quick introductory handshake from earlier, but a real one, the kind that communicates respect. "I just want to ask you one question," Steve said. "Not for the game, just for me. What do you do every single day?" Marcus thought for a moment. Then he said, "I wake up, I make breakfast for my kids, I go to work, I come home, I help with homework, I coach baseball on Saturdays, I go to church on Sundays, and I start over." Steve Harvey looked at him for a long beat. Then he turned back to the audience. "That man is not too poor," he said. "That man is exactly what this country is supposed to be built on, and I want every person watching this at home to understand something. The measure of a man is not his salary, it is his character, it is his consistency, it is what he does when nobody is applauding him." He paused. "And Marcus Webb has been doing the right thing for a very long time without nearly enough applause. So let's fix that right now." The studio gave Marcus Webb a standing ovation, not a polite one, a real one. Rochelle was crying. Gerald was clapping with both hands above his head. Yvette had both hands over her mouth and tears running down her face. Denise was standing very still, watching her husband receive from a room full of strangers the recognition she had been withholding for years, and something in her face was doing the complicated work of a person who is beginning to understand the size of a mistake. Steve gave the room a moment to breathe, and then he brought the game back. Denise had scored 130 points. Marcus needed 70 from 5 questions to win the $20,000 prize. He stood at the fast money podium with the same steadiness he brought to everything else. The room was behind him in a way that rooms rarely get behind contestants, not just hoping he would do well, but needing him too, the way people need things to go right for someone they have just watched be publicly underestimated. Marcus answered all 5 questions with the quiet, practical accuracy of a man who pays attention to the world around him. He named things people do early in the morning, things found in a toolbox, reasons people are late to work, what a father teaches his son, things a man is proud of. He answered each one in under 2 seconds. He did not second-guess himself. He did not perform. His 5 answers scored 93 points. Combined with Denise's 130, the Webb family had 223 points, 23 over the threshold. The $20,000 was theirs. The board lit up and the studio went up with it. Marcus stood at the podium for just a moment with his eyes closed, just a single breath, taken slowly, before the rest of his family reached him. Rochelle arrived first and nearly knocked him sideways. Gerald grabbed him by the shoulders. Yvette held her brother for a long time without saying anything. Denise stood just outside the group for a moment before Marcus reached out his arm and pulled her in. He did not make a production of it. He just extended his arm, the way he had been extending himself toward his family his whole life, and she came in, and they stood there together in the middle of all of it. After the taping ended and the families were taken to a green room to collect themselves, the Webb family sat together in the particular quiet that follows an experience too large for immediate conversation. Rochelle, who had been the loudest person in the room for the better part of 2 hours, said almost nothing. Gerald sat with his elbows on his knees looking at the floor. Yvette stayed close to Marcus. Denise went to the restroom and came back with her mascara freshly fixed, which told everyone in that room everything they needed to know about what had happened in there. She sat down next to Marcus and did not say anything for a while. Then she said, quietly enough that only he could hear, "I'm sorry." Marcus looked at her. "I know," he said. It was not the end of a conversation. It was the beginning of a long one, but it was a beginning. The episode aired on a Wednesday evening 5 weeks after the taping. The clip of Steve Harvey's response to Denise, specifically the line, "That man is not too poor. That man is exactly what this country is supposed to be built on," circulated across every major platform within hours of broadcast. By the following morning, it had been viewed 18 million times. By the end of the week, the number had climbed past 40 million. The comments were remarkable in their consistency. There was almost no pile-on directed at Denise, which surprised many people who expected the internet to do what the internet often does. Instead, the response was directed overwhelmingly at Marcus and at the larger truth Steve Harvey had named. Men who had been quietly diminished in their marriages wrote about what it meant to see someone say out loud what they had never been able to articulate. Women wrote about recognizing themselves in Denise and feeling grateful that the moment existed so they could look at it honestly. Parents wrote about the lesson they planned to show their children. The phrase, "show up and start over," from Marcus's quiet answer to Steve's question, became one of the most shared short statements from the clip. It was printed on shirts. It appeared on motivational accounts. A pastor in Atlanta used it as the title of a sermon. A high school football coach in Ohio put it on his locker room wall. Marcus Webb had not been trying to say something memorable. He had just answered the question honestly. That, too, said something about who he was. In a radio interview 6 weeks after the episode aired, Steve Harvey was asked about the moment. He spoke about it longer than he spoke about almost anything else in that conversation. "What got to me," he said, "was not what she said. People say careless things, we all do. What got to me was him, Marcus, standing there with his arms folded, looking straight ahead with the expression of a man who has heard this before and has decided not to let it destroy him. I know that expression. I have worn that expression. That is the expression of a man who has decided that his dignity is his own and nobody gets to take it, no matter what they say." He paused in the interview before continuing. "And I will tell you something else. I did not call that woman out to embarrass her. I called it out because that kind of thing, that quiet, constant undermining of a good man by someone who is supposed to be in his corner, that does real damage. It does damage to the man. It does damage to the children who watch it. And it does damage to the woman herself because you cannot respect someone you have taught yourself to diminish. You just cannot. And a marriage without respect is not a marriage. It is a performance." Marcus and Denise did not separate. They did not divorce. What they did was harder than either of those things. In its own way, they stayed and they worked on it. They started seeing a marriage counselor 2 months after the episode aired. This was Denise's initiative, which mattered. She had watched the clip. She had read the comments, not the ones directed at Marcus, which she found painful in the specific way that the truth is painful, but the ones from women who saw themselves in her, who talked about the slow drift of a person who stops valuing what they have because they have been looking at what they don't have for too long. She recognized herself in those comments. She has said, in the one interview she gave about the experience, that the hardest part was not what Steve Harvey said to her on stage. The hardest part was realizing that everything he said was something Marcus had been living for years, quietly, without complaint. "He never asked me to change," she said. "He never gave me an ultimatum. He just kept showing up, and I had been treating that like it was nothing when it was actually everything." Marcus has said very little publicly about the aftermath. The one thing he has said in the same interview was this: "Denise is a good woman who had gotten into some bad habits. I had gotten into the habit of accepting them. We both had things to work on." He said it without bitterness. He said it the way he said most things, plainly and precisely, and without any more or less than the truth required. The $20,000 from Family Feud went 3 ways. A portion paid off the remaining balance on Marcus's truck. A portion went into Brianna and Jordan's college fund, the first dedicated contribution either account had ever received. And the remainder went toward a long weekend that the whole family, including Yvette and Rochelle and Gerald, took together in the Smoky Mountains that fall. Yvette has said that the weekend in the mountains was the best time the family had spent together in years. She said Marcus laughed more that weekend than she had heard him laugh in a long time. She said the children were wild and happy. She said Denise cooked dinner the last night and it was good, really good, and Marcus ate 2 plates and told her so, and Denise smiled the way she had smiled when things were easier between them. It was not a complete restoration. Nothing that has been worn down over years is restored in a weekend, but it was a direction. And in a marriage that had been pointing in the wrong direction for long enough, a change of direction is everything. Steve Harvey has spoken and written extensively about the responsibility that comes with the platform he has been given. He did not seek out the moment with the Webb family. He did not engineer it for content. He responded to what was in front of him, the way he was raised to respond to things, directly, honestly, and without pretending that something was acceptable when it was not. But the reason the moment resonated with tens of millions of people, and the reason it is still being discussed and shared years after it aired, is not primarily about Steve Harvey. It is about Marcus Webb, about the specific and recognizable portrait of a man who works hard and loves his family and asks for very little and receives even less acknowledgement than he asks for. There are millions of Marcus Webbs. They are at water treatment plants and warehouses and construction sites and schools and hospitals and small businesses. They wake up and make breakfast and go to work and come home and do it again. They coach Little League. They call their mothers on Sundays. They extend their arms toward the people they love even when those people have stopped leaning into them. They do not make speeches about it. They do not ask to be celebrated. They just keep going. And what Steve Harvey did that April afternoon was simply refuse to let that go unnamed. He said out loud on national television in front of 40 million eventual viewers, "This man is not poor. This man is what real wealth looks like. And he has been standing right next to you the whole time." Marcus still works at the water treatment facility. He was promoted to senior operations supervisor 2 years after the episode aired, a role he had been working toward for 7 years and finally received, with a salary increase that solved, practically, some of what had been between him and Denise. He still grows vegetables in the backyard every summer. He still coaches baseball. Brianna is 12 now and has started playing competitive soccer. Jordan is 10 and has inherited his father's quiet competitiveness and his mother's social confidence in a combination that suggests he is going to be formidable. Marcus coaches neither of their teams but shows up to every game. Denise still works at the medical practice. She has been promoted twice since the episode. She and Marcus are still together, still working on it in the daily, undramatic way that marriages are sustained, not by grand gestures but by the accumulation of small, consistent choices to show up for each other. Yvette still calls her brother every week. She has said that he seems lighter than he did before. Not because everything is perfect, it is not, but because something that was unspoken for a long time got said and named and dealt with. She says he laughs more. She says he seems like himself again. Gerald still maintains that his answer in the second round was the turning point of the main game and does not accept challenges to this position. And in the Webb family home, on the wall just inside the kitchen where the family passes every morning on the way to the table, there is a framed photograph from the Smoky Mountains trip. Marcus and Denise and Brianna and Jordan, in the gold light of a fall afternoon, standing in front of something large and beautiful. All four of them are looking at the camera. All four of them are smiling. Underneath the photograph, in handwriting that belongs to Brianna, are 4 words that she wrote and taped there one Saturday morning without being asked. "We show up, always." Marcus saw it the next morning and did not say anything. He just stood there for a moment, reading it, with the expression of a man who has been through something hard and come out the other side knowing exactly what he is worth. That expression, for anyone who knows Marcus Webb, is the only answer that ever mattered. If this story moved you, if you know a Marcus Webb in your own life, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. These are the stories that remind us what real wealth looks like. Hit the notification bell so you never miss one.